Good morning, everyone. Your morning weather briefing for this Tuesday, June 5th, finds that there are some changes to the forecast this morning, largely in the 11 to 15-day period, where we have some somewhat cooler trends for the plain states and into the Corn Belt, and also somewhat of a wetter trend for the Corn Belt. Again, that would be for late in the 2-week time frame. You can see those changes in my temperature precipitation outlooks this morning. Quite a bit of above and much above normal temperatures for especially central and western portions of the nation for the next 10 days. But note that I am going for much less in the way of areas of above normal temperatures for the 11 to 15-day time frame. Not much change in my 6 to 10-day precipitation forecast this morning, but have gone for a bigger area of above normal precipitation for the 11 to 15-day time frame. QPF discussion for the 1 to 5-day time frame. I'm not going to make a major argument against what is shown this morning. If anything, it probably is a little bit too wet, as has been the case so far this week. The Weather Prediction Center is heavily basing their forecasts off of the GFS operational and the GFS ensemble against much drier European model solutions. I have no problem with that in general. I think that there are going to be some good rains in the Corn Belt during the next 5 days, with a multi-day rainfall chance being seen during that time frame. I think that coverage of 1+ inch rainfall amounts in the Corn Belt on this map is overstated, but again, I'm not going to make a big argument against what is shown. It's just as good of a forecast as anything that I could draw this morning. For the day 6 to 7 time frame, I think that this map as well is being based mainly off of the GFS operational model, although that model would probably be wetter than this map shows. It is the placement of the rainfall that they are most agreeing with the GFS operational. The European operational would have rains further northeast. Call this is not much more than a guess. It is likely to change a lot in the days ahead. Afternoon high temperatures yesterday, a fairly pleasant day once again across the Corn Belt. Those are above normal temperatures, but again, nothing real extreme in the way of heat. Note though that we did see some 90+ degree temperatures in spotty areas of the far northwestern Corn Belt, and that is certainly a sign of things to come with a warm weather pattern for at least the next 10 days. Rainfall very marginal across the Corn Belt during the last 24-hour time frame. You can see that based on actual totals, and a look at radar estimated rainfall during that time frame as well. Looking at the radar this morning, just some isolated activity in the far northeastern Corn Belt, also some portions of the southwestern mid-south. A more substantial rainfall event ongoing this morning in the northern plains, and that is an area that is going to be the focal area for some nice rains over the next 24-hour time frame. Going into this period of increased rainfall chances for the Corn Belt, let's once again take a look at the areas of the Corn Belt that most need the rainfall as we stand right now. Certainly southeastern sections of Iowa into northeastern Missouri would be one area that would need the rainfall, as that is an area that has seen under half of normal rainfall during the last 2 weeks. Another pocket of subnormal rainfall during that time frame, especially across portions of Indiana. So again, it's the early portion of June, as is typical over this time of year. You won't find too many places in the Corn Belt that won't appreciate rainfall, but those two circled areas will be the areas that most need to see rainfall, with the better rainfall chances coming up during the next 10+ days. As far as the forecast is concerned, we are not looking at a whole lot of rainfall in the Corn Belt for today and into the early portion of tomorrow. Just some very light activity in extreme northeastern and extreme eastern portions of the Corn Belt for today. We will be seeing a thunderstorm complex developing in the northern plains tonight, and that'll be moving into the far northwestern Corn Belt by late tonight, and that will be the start of some legitimate ring of fire rainfall chances in the Corn Belt for later on tomorrow, and several chances beyond that for at least the rest of the 10-day time frame. Looking at surface features as of 1 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, you can see that the European model is showing some rains in the Corn Belt at that time. So is the GFS operational model, and there's the Canadian operational and the European ensemble also indicating an area of rainfall in the Corn Belt at that time. As we get to 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday, a European model showing rain. There's the GFS operational, Canadian model. There's the European ensemble with a broad area of rain. I'm not going to bore you this morning with a lot of those maps like I've done in recent days, but let's just jump ahead to actual 10-day rainfall forecast from the period from today through early in the day on June 15th. Now, anyone that is not going for a lot of rainfall during the next 10 days is certainly going to be citing the European operational model and to some extent the European ensemble as well. Look at the 10-day rainfall totals from the European operational there on the bottom left, and you can find that it is forecasting under a half inch of rainfall for the next 10 days for a big portion of the Corn Belt. Anything bigger than that confined to the far northwest. Its ensemble is a little bit wetter than that, but even there it is forecasting under an inch of rainfall for a good portion of the southwestern Corn Belt during the next 10 days. You compare that, of course, to the GFS operational model in the upper left that is forecasting a widespread 2 to 4 inch rainfall event during the next 10 days across a big portion of the Corn Belt. So again, anyone that's not going for a lot of rainfall the next 10 days is going to be citing the European operational. Anyone going for big rains during the next 10 days is certainly going to be citing the GFS operational. Personally, I'm going against the European operational model this morning. But at the same time, I'm going against the GFS operational model as well. Forecast that I believe, well, to some extent, you got to believe the European ensemble that is going for relatively decent rains. But in general, I'm basing my forecast more on the GFS ensemble and the Canadian ensemble that are both forecasting fairly widespread 1 to 2 plus inch rainfall amounts during the next 10 days. Now, I'm sure that everyone is well aware of the fact that I do generally consider the European operational and the European ensemble as the superior forecast tools right now as compared to the GFS and certainly versus the Canadian models as well. However, this is a situation where I just think that the wetter GFS and Canadian solutions are going to be more correct. Again, this is a ring of fire situation coming up, a multi-day rainfall event that is going to be getting started tomorrow, and probably we'll be seeing several chances of rainfall, probably something on a daily basis for the rest of the 10-day time frame. History shows that ring of fire situations can and do produce significant or even heavy amounts of rainfall in the Corn Belt region. With that in mind, I just cannot believe that the European operational model with its under half inch of rainfall amounts over such a big area of the Corn Belt during the next 10 days can verify. GFS operational is probably overdone as well, but I certainly can envision some places in the Corn Belt seeing the 2 to 4 inch rains that it is forecasting. If you want to look at it in general, I think that the GFS ensemble and the Canadian ensemble forecasting fairly widespread coverage of 1 to 2 inch rains, locally even bigger than that, is your best estimate as far as rainfall is concerned in the Corn Belt for the next 10 days. Longer term, there are still legitimate rainfall chances in the 11 to 15 day time frame as well, and as I noted this morning, I think that forecasts are trending wetter in that time frame. As usual, I think you have to once again disregard the GFS operational, as you always have to do in the 11 to 15 day time frame. But even disregarding that, you can see that the GFS ensemble, the Canadian ensemble, even the European ensemble forecasting widespread significant rain in the Corn Belt for the 11 to 15 day time frame. So again, just a little bit more of a wetter trend in the 11 to 15 day period today versus what was shown by the maps yesterday. As far as the forecast is concerned on temperatures, plenty of heat in the forecast through at least early portion of the 11 to 15 day time frame, especially as you go further west in the Corn Belt and into the Plain States. Look at high temperatures for today. You can see that pockets of 90 plus degree heat will be returning on this Tuesday to western and southwestern portions of the Corn Belt and areas to the south of there. And that will start a string of days in which 90 to 95 plus degree heat will be seen across the Plain States and especially across the western and southern portion of the Corn Belt. Look at this forecast as we head towards Sunday. Note the 90 to 95 plus degree heat at that time across about the southwestern third to as much as half of the Corn Belt and areas to the south of there. At the same time, though, note that quite a temperature contrast that day, just 70s for highs in the northeastern Corn Belt. So even though the European model is not breaking out a lot of rainfall that day, I would think that the battle zone between those two air masses, the big temperature contrast, would indeed be focusing some good rains across whatever portion of the Corn Belt indeed does see the temperature contrast setting up on Sunday. Now, longer term, again, I did note that we are looking at some cooler temperature trends as we get towards the middle and latter portions of the 11 to 15 day time frame. Since last Friday, I've been focusing on the 500 millibar pattern as of 7 o'clock in the evening on June 18th. The models back on Friday had somewhat of a trough of low pressure in western portion of the nation and a ridge further east. We saw the models totally back off on that type of a pattern even as we got towards this past Sunday, continued that trend yesterday, and are even more towards that trend today. Note that these 500 millibar maps of late in the day on June 18th, any sort of a ridging at that time in just far western, northwestern portions of the nation, that is an agreement by all the models. We saw some semblance of a trough of low pressure indicated by the models yesterday at that time, but note that on today's models, much more of an emphatic trough of low pressure in eastern and even central portions of the nation by the time we get to late in the day on June 18th. So certainly not a overly cool weather pattern at that time, but you'd have to certainly agree that any abnormal heat would be shoved way into western portions of the nation at that time, and a much more normal temperature regime would be seen for especially middle and latter portion of the 11 to 15 day time frame, not only for the Corn Belt, but eventually for a lot of the plain states as well. Internationally, this morning, certainly the dry season has started in the northern Safrina corn areas of Brazil. Periodic rains will be seen further south, but any big rains of more than 2 inches likely confined to just central and southern portion of Paraná and areas to the south of there. In Europe, still strictly above normal rainfall during the next 2 weeks for southern and southwestern portion of Europe. Some very good rains over the next 10 days in France. Drier weather pattern further north in Europe, especially in Scandinavia. We are still looking at below normal rainfall during the next 2 weeks for the winter grain and summer row crop areas of the former Soviet Union, especially dry there over the next week, when a lot of that area is going to be seeing little or nothing. For the spring grain areas of the former Soviet Union, still a lot of rainfall in the forecast for the next 10 days for especially western portion of that area. They are looking at some nice warming for the next 2 to 3 days, but by Friday and beyond, cooler weather moving back into the spring wheat areas of Russia, and that cooler trend will continue for the rest of the 10-day or even 2-week forecast for especially western portions of that area. Things have been trending wetter as of late for Manchurian corn and soybean areas of China. Not an incredibly wet pattern, but near to above normal rainfall there during the next 2 weeks. Legitimate rainfall chances there for the 1 to 5, 6 to 10, and 11 to 15 day time frames. Not an especially wet pattern for the North China Plain. Not a big problem though, as they have seen a lot of rainfall there during the last 30 days, and that below normal rainfall there would certainly be a welcome for the winter wheat harvest that is ongoing in the North China Plain right now. Weather forecast today for the Canadian prairies. I think that this forecast from the European operational model is probably too wet, but after some dry weather there for the rest of this week, we will be seeing better rainfall chances than was suggested by yesterday's maps in the 6 to 10 day time frame. At least some half to 1 inch rainfall amounts. Certainly would be more than that if this European model were to verify, but I think that it is too wet. Going to be seeing some above normal temperatures by a big margin in the Canadian prairies for especially Thursday through about Monday. Temperature anomalies for this coming Saturday shows that a lot of the area is going to be running 10 to 20 degrees above normal. Once beyond next Monday, though, a cooler weather pattern going to be seen for the Canadian prairies. In Australia, it's certainly not the driest weather pattern that we have seen there for the next 2 weeks, especially as compared to the dryness that has been dominating that area for the last several months, but it's still obviously not as wet of a weather pattern as they would like to see. Near to slightly below normal rainfall in the western and eastern growing areas for the next 2 weeks. In the western growing areas, a lot of that rainfall is going to be seen during the next week. For the eastern growing areas, a couple of periods of rainfall of mostly under a half inch over especially the next week. Finishing up this morning in India, no changes to the forecast versus the last couple of days. A pretty active Indian monsoon for the 1 to 5 and 6 to 10 day time frame, but a big decrease in monsoonal activity as we get towards the 11 to 15 day period. That's what I have for this Tuesday morning. Everyone have themselves a great day.